So this is going to be.
Oh yeah, there's a delay.
Yes, there is a slight delay, but yes,
Like,
we're now live.
10 or 15
right?
seconds.
Even with the delay, you know, it's anyways, silly.
Okay. Should I do it?
So yeah, welcome everyone to this session with JavaFX and with Spring Boot with Paul and Gail Anderson. Truly a power couple in this industry. I've had the pleasure of knowing them for many years and I'm really a fan of their work. And I hope you enjoyed their session I hope you're a fan of their session or their work as much as I am. And so, yeah, I'll just turn it over to you guys and let you have at it because I know you're jam-packed. So,
okay, great.
Off you go. Have fun.
Okay, hey everybody, welcome to the Java Champions Conference, where we are virtual everywhere. My name is Paul Anderson.
My name is Gail Anderson.
And we are with the Anderson Software Group. This is our session today, Front and Center, JavaFX with Spring Boot. So who are we? Gail and I are Java champions and members of the Oracle ACE Group. We own a software training company here in the US, and our courses include Java, JavaFX, and other programming languages. We're the authors of 9 textbooks on software programming, and we have 2 books on JavaFX that you can see here. We're also the authors of 2 live lesson videos from Pearson Education, one on JavaFX programming and the other on Java reflection. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We begin with a discussion of why you might want to use JavaFX for your UI on the desktop or on mobile devices, and why Spring Boot is a viable alternative for back-end operations from your UI, such as databases and REST web services. Next, we give you a design approach for integrating JavaFX and Spring Boot in your Java application. We introduce Gluon's Ignite library for dependency injection with JavaFX and Spring Boot, and Gail's Ignite demo will show you the design approach. Now, for data persistence, we're going to use JPA with an in-memory H2 database and another version with MySQL. A REST service will provide CRUD operations for a music database, and our music demo is a JavaFX client that consumes these services with Spring Web Client. Our last demo will be a REST service consumed as a reactive stream with Spring Web Client. Finally, we'll wrap up with a GitHub link to the demo code and follow with Q&A. And if you want to, go ahead and drop into the chat and tell us where you're from, and we will take questions at the end of the session. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so why JavaFX? For modern client UI designs, the goal is to have platform-independent source code where you write once and install everywhere. JavaFX has a rich set of UI controls and support for graphics and media engines. JavaFX includes a scene graph metaphor and provides FXML to separate the view from the model and the controller. And you can also use JavaFX tasks and the concurrency library for any asynchronous background execution with observable entities that keep your UI responsive during background tasks. JavaFX also has properties, listeners, binding, and event handlers that makes UIs look modern, and you can develop them very easily. Now remember, JavaFX is just Java APIs, which means that it's Java with all of its power and stability. And JavaFX is stable and maintained by Gluon in partnership with Oracle. Gluon also has commercial LTS licenses and releases. Okay, why Spring Boot? Well, Spring Boot, as you know, is an open source Java-based framework that's used to create microservices. It's an extension of the Spring framework and simplifies the boilerplate configuration necessary for setting up a Spring application. Spring Boot is easy to use and understand. It definitely reduces your development time. And the benefits that are listed here is you have a set of starter dependencies for configuration. When you write your Java code, it'll be annotation based. The dependency management will be easier, and Spring Boot will manage REST endpoints for you, and it also includes an embedded servlet container. Spring Boot has starters that will handle your dependency management, and all you have to do is add these dependency jars to your class path. You can do that through Maven or Gradle. And the format, as you see here, is of the starter is some examples for the web, JUnit testing, and for persistence JPA. And there are many, many others that are that you can use in Spring Boot. Okay, now Spring Boot and JavaFX do not work out of the box because JavaFX has its own lifecycle and creates its own controllers. Likewise, the FXML loader in JavaFX also creates its own controller instance, and none of this is managed by Spring. This means you can't use dependency injection and other Spring features in a JavaFX controller unless you have some help. So Gluon Ignite is a third-party library that integrates JavaFX with Spring Boot. To use it, all you have to do is add the artifact ID starter dependency to your Maven POM file, and then have your Spring Boot main application launch JavaFX. Make sure that both Ignite and the Spring Boot contexts are initialized in the program, and then have the JavaFX loader build your scene graph. Okay, a little bit more about Gluon Ignite. It supports popular DI frameworks, not only Spring, but other ones like Juice and Dagger and Micronaut, I believe. It also allows dependency injection in both JavaFX applications and also in your FXML controllers. But the big thing that Gluon Ignite does for you is it supports multiple views, which Gail's going to demonstrate for you in our demos later today. Using Ignite is very easy. You include the dependency in your POM file and then initialize the Spring context. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Gail now. We're going to be using NetBeans this morning for our IDE, and she's going to be showing you the design approach with a weather forecast little demo program that we have here. So I'll give it over to Gail here.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to bring up our first demo, which is called Ignite Demo. And this is a basic program that shows how to run a JavaFX UI and Spring Boot together. You have to initialize both the JavaFX application runtime system as well as initialize the Spring Boot context. In this demo, we show that you can have multiple views and multiple scene graph views and how to switch between them. So this basic demo here's your JavaFX UI, and we have two buttons. If we click one, we update the weather, and we get a random weather forecast that comes up various times as you click it. So that's real simple. We can click on Get Secondary View, and now this is a different view. And the way that JavaFX is organized is that typically you use FXML, which is a declarative markup language that allows you to define your views statically. And then you have a controller associated with each view that you can do dynamic management of the UI with. Okay, so let's look at this. So first, how did we create this? So there's various ways that you can create these applications. So for this one, we used a new project, and so we use the NetBeans IDE, but that's not a requirement. Obviously, you can use your favorite IDE, and all of them have plugins in which you can create JavaFX type projects. So we created Java with Maven, and then down here, there is an option that allows you to create FXML. And we chose this one because this archetype for Maven gives you two views, and then we thought that was a good starting point. And then we added the Spring stuff later. Now, if you're not familiar with JavaFX, a good way to get started is to go to OpenFX.io, and there's a whole set of documents that takes you through using JavaFX with IntelliJ, NetBeans, and Eclipse, and how to get everything going. Okay, let's go back to NetBeans. And okay, so the first thing I want to show you in the project is the POM file. POM file. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we add the Spring Boot starter, and we have the parent starter, which we're using 2.62. I think 2.63 is out now. And that's all you need for a basic Spring Boot application. There's the testing thing. And then for JavaFX dependencies, this would be included the JavaFX controls, the FXML, and then plugins for both JavaFX and Spring Boot. Okay, so in this project, we have an interface, and this interface provides initial resource location for our primary view. Let's go to the main application. The main application now, if you're from the Spring Boot world, this will look somewhat familiar. We have the annotation for Spring Boot application, and we also include component scan, and this allows the Spring system to scan the Ignite and any other sub-packages that you may have in your program to make sure that it can instantiate all the objects it needs to. So when the main program launches, it calls application.launch, and that launches the JavaFX application runtime system for this main class. And you can see we can use auto-wired, that's a Spring Boot injection system, and we auto-wire our FXML loader, which is JavaFX way that it parses FXML files and instantiates the views for you, injecting the controller with any controls that you define in your FXML. This Spring context is an Ignite object, and in the start method, so the overridden start method is part of the JavaFX runtime, and it then initiates the Spring Boot application. So it calls here Spring application.run. Now I want to just warn you that I'm going through a lot of these projects really quickly. I'm going to show you a lot of code. Don't worry, all this code is in the GitHub link that will show you at the end, and you'll be able to look at it at your leisure later. But so we're just going to show you bits here and bits there, and to give you a kind of an overview of the kinds of things that you can do. Set root is a way that we can switch our scene graph. So it sets the root of the parent stage, and the stage is the top level JavaFX window. Okay, so let's go look at open it up.
Okay, you want to get the POM file? Or
No, double click.
Yeah, scene builder.
Okay, so primary.fxml is our FXML file, and Scene Builder is a drag and drop utility that you can download for free from the Gluon website, and allows you to do drag and drop design of your website. So it's kind of cool. It lets you. What I want to show you is that, for example, the buttons, these are both the buttons you saw. We can define the event handler by just by giving it the name of the method, and the method will be implemented in our controller class. So this is how you can connect your static FXML to a controller. So that's all I'm going to show you in Scene Builder. And now do the edit. Okay, so this is what FXML looks like. It's an XML-based declarative markup language, and you can see we defined the controller here. And here are the so when you design your UI in Scene Builder, it creates the components that you choose from the component library. So here we have a label. We have a horizontal box that contains both the buttons, and here's the on action event handler that we are configuring for this button. At the bottom, and this is interesting, at the bottom is the label. That's where you saw the weather forecast come out, and this has something called an FX ID set, and that means that's how we can access this weather label in our controller code. So let's go to the controller code. And this is a primary controller. It's annotated with the Spring Boot component, so our Spring system can find it. And here's our weather label. So we annotate any of the controllers that we need or controls with with FXML, and the FXML loader will inject them for us. So there's no code here that instantiates that. It's done for us by the FXML loader. And then here are the two buttons, the load weather forecast. Now, what does it do? It calls something called weather service, get weather forecast, and sets the weather label text. And we do that with the auto wired. Now that's the Spring Boot weather service. And we're going to show you weather service next. The second button, this allows us to switch views. So this is how we do it. We change the location to the secondary FXML, and we call the set root, which was the static method I showed you in the main class, with the FXML loader.load to build our new graph. Okay, so So the weather service simply returns a random string with the get weather forecast method, and we annotate this with service so that Spring Boot can pick it up. Okay, I'm going to close everything.
Yeah, just close all. Okay, and then back up, close that. Okay, and we're ready to go back to the notes here. Okay, all right, so the next demo that we're going to show you has both JPA persistence for a database as well as REST services. So let's talk about that. Most of you know about JPA, Java Persistence API. This allows you to define entities, attributes, and relationships. It also provides an entity manager, the Java Persistent Query Language, and a criteria API. Hibernate implements JPA with object relational mappings, which is an ORM framework on top of JPA. And this helps you provide mappings between the tables and the database and handles exceptions and transactions. Now, an entity is just a Java POJO that can be persisted to the database, and this represents a table that's stored in the database itself. Every instance represents a row in the table. Now, when Gail shows you the code, you'll see a lot of JPA annotations, and not all of them we're using here, but you will see entity that defines a Java class that can be mapped to a database table as well as the table itself. And then we have an ID for the primary key and a generated one from the database. We have other ones for joining, and then those relationships that I talked about have the annotations that you see here as well. Okay, now using this requires using the JPA repository interface, and this is provided by the Spring framework, and it defines a repository for each domain entity in an application. And this repository contains methods for performing CRUD operations to the database, as well as sorting and pagination. Now, to create a repository, all you have to do is define a repository interface and extend it from the JPA repository that you see here. Note that this is generic, so T would be the domain type and ID would be the type of the primary key. When you do this, you inherit the JPA methods shown below, but you can write your own as well. And you can see with some of these methods that we were able to count the number of entities, find an entity, save it, and delete it. Okay, here's an overview of implementing persistence with JavaFX and JPA using Spring Boot. To do this, you'll need to set up a server and a client. So for the server, we'll have starter dependencies and an application properties file for the setup. And then our approach is to initially develop the database with the in-memory H2 embedded database. And then once you have tested everything out, you can move to a real database like MySQL. The server will have domain entities and the JPA repository that I talked about, and we'll also have REST controllers. Now, on the client side, we set up the client with the Spring Boot application launching JavaFX, which Gail showed you in the previous demo. And then the client will have domain POJOs, a REST service, and a view controller. Now, most of you know about what a REST service is. It's a producer consumer with resources where the service is stateless and cacheable, and clients use the middle layer for the service to decouple the clients from the actual underlying database. In the code that Gail's going to show you, you'll see the REST controller annotation with these annotations that allow us to read a resource, update an existing one, create a new resource, and delete it. Okay, so our next demo is going to be a music collection database consisting of 4 tables: a music categories table, a recording artist table, a recordings table consisting of tracks, and then you can see that we have primary keys and foreign keys here. And what Gail is going to do now is she's going to fire up a Spring Boot REST program, which provides a REST music category service using a JPA H2 embedded in-memory database. So I'll turn it back over to Gail now.
Okay, so let's close this up a little bit, and we're running our Spring Boot REST, which is our server that talks to the in-memory database. Now it's going to take a second to come up. After it comes up, when it stops talking to me here. Okay, I think it's up. Okay, so it's talking to an in-memory H2 database, but you can check out the database separately just to do it. So H2 in-memory is great for development. So you can check this out by going to a console, and this is from before. Okay, so when the dialog comes up, that's good. That means your server is running and you can connect to it. So here are the 4 tables that Paul talked about. In our demo today, we're just going to be manipulating the music categories table. So let's show you what it looks like. We can do run a statement here. So here you see we have 8 entries, different music categories: classical, rock, jazz, etc., and the music category ID. But as I said, this is just a part of the whole scheme of the database. Let's just look at recordings. Let's try to do clear recordings, run. And you can see the recordings has 2 foreign keys: the recording artist ID and music category ID. And that's just to show you that it's possible to do all these relational queries as well. But we are just going to be, as I said, using the music categories. So let's do that. Okay, let's go back to our server. Actually, I want to go back to, I want to show you the
Spring initializer?
Yeah.
It's right there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you got it right there.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so this, the server does not use JavaFX. It's a pure Spring Boot, and a great way to begin a Spring project is with the Spring initializer. So you can choose the whether you want to use Gradle or Maven, Java or Kotlin, and then you can add dependencies, and you can see that you can add database stuff and all sorts of great stuff. So that's how we created this project. Okay, so because we're talking to a database, we need to configure our application's properties. And this is all the stuff that we needed to configure our H2. Now you also see we have a data.sql and a schema.sql. And these we use to initialize the data in the database. So when I showed you the H2 console, there was already data installed. And this is nice because every time we restart the server, it'll start from a known point. And for development, that's great. Okay, the Spring Boot application is simply the standard that you get with Spring. So let's look at our JPA stuff. And one of the most important classes, of course, is the entity class. This is our music category entity. And these are all Spring Boot Spring annotations that talk to JPA, and then under the hood Hibernate and H2. And if your table name is different than your class name, then you use the table annotation, which in our case it is. We have two columns. You saw we have two columns, and we also named them just to make sure that the name is proper. The primary key is annotated with ID, and we say that we want the value to be generated by the underlying system, not ourselves. And the rest of it is the default constructor and getters and setters. And then now let's look at the rest. It's so Paul talked about the music, the repository. And this is really cool because in JPA, in Spring, you have a JPA repository that takes the entity is the first type, and the primary key type is the second one in the generic JPA repository. And notice that this is an interface, so you don't need to implement it. Under the hood, Spring and JPA implement it for you. And most of the time, this interface is empty. But if you wanted to add methods to it, then you could add them here. And there's a lot of ways that you can implement the added method. Here we are saying use query, a native query, but there's also a really nice method parser that can implement your method based on how you name it. And that's a really nice way to do it too. Okay, so the last thing to look at is the resource. And this is our REST controller, and this provides the endpoints that the client will need to talk to. And Paul showed you the get mappings for get. There's two for get. One, get all the music categories, and the other, get music category by ID. Delete does the delete, post does the create, and put does the update. And you see that we have injected our music category. Okay. So we're going to keep the service running because we will want to talk to it.
Close all.
And go back to.
Yep, and we're going to go back to the notes. There we go. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the client now and what we're going to be doing on that side of things. Now, before Spring version 5, clients consumed REST services with REST template, which offered only synchronous or blocking data retrievals. And synchronous, as you know, means that a thread is going to be blocked until that thread receives a response. With Web Client, you can work with reactive streams and others, both blocking and non-blocking, for your data retrievals. Since this is a reactive approach, it's Spring-based, you can use functional programming techniques to filter and transform the data, and that's what we're going to be showing you. Now, to use Web Client, just include the WebFlux dependency in your POM file, and then inject the Web Client builder and write methods that retrieve the data with a mono or a flux wrapper from the publisher interface. Now, the mono retrieval type is a stream of 0 or 1 object, and the flux is a stream of 0 or multiple objects. And the default for Web Client is an asynchronous data retrieval using retrieve for a reactive service. And with legacy systems that are not reactive, you can use retrieve and block, which produces the data for the response that comes from the client. Note that to use Web Client for its full potential, you should create end-to-end reactive systems for both clients and servers. And we do have a demo that will be showing you that here in a second. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Gail, and she's going to fire up the client, and she's going to show you the code that's using the Spring Web Client.
Okay, so first we're going to fire up the client. And as Paul said, we're using the Spring Boot WebFlux library that has the Web Client, and we're using it in blocking mode as opposed to non-blocking mode. And so now here's our JavaFX UI. We have a table on the left that has our database rows in it. And you can see there's a little nice drop shadow. We've used a split pane control so we can make the two sides grow and shrink. And on the right side, we have different controls. We have a text field, we have a label, and we have various buttons that are right now, they're disabled. But if we type something in, so let's add category gospel, you can see that as I type something in, the new category became available. There's a selection handler. So if I select rock, delete is enabled. And then if I start typing, also update is enabled. And we control those with binding expressions that we'll briefly show you, but you can look at later. And then we have this full CRUD, so we can do a delete as well. So, okay, so we've made some changes. So let's quickly go and check out our program and make sure that.
Keep putting on, look at H2.
Yeah. So we're going to have to probably reconnect. Yeah. And let's look at music categories. So now we have, you see that rock and roll has changed. We've deleted alternative and we've added gospel. So that's good. The program seems to be working. Okay, so let's look a little bit at how this program is organized. And first, we're going to just check out the POM real quick. Okay, so this program is structured very similarly to the Ignite demo program that we showed you earlier. The big difference is, of course, this is only a single view, so we don't switch between views, and then we have the underlying client to talk to the database. So one of the things that we're using from Spring is the WebFlux library, and that includes the reactive web client. And as Paul noted, that this is we're talking to a traditional REST service, so that it doesn't make sense to use it in a non-blocking asynchronous mode, so we use it in a blocking mode. And then the rest of the dependencies are the same with the JavaFX, FXML, and the Ignite client. Okay, so the main application, it's similar to what we saw in the Ignite demo, but we've added one more feature, and that is that we are the configurable application context, which is from Spring. We are saving that when it gets initialized down here in the start program. And the reason we do that is because in this program, Spring is doing stuff for us. And when we stop, we want to make sure we nicely close the Spring Boot context as well. So when the program is running and you close it here, this closes the JavaFX application thread. So we want to make sure that the Spring Boot stuff is brought down nicely. Okay, let's look and see other sources, what our view looks like. So we have the split pane that we showed you, and on the left side we have the table view, and we have the two table columns, and these table columns, we control their relative width with binding statements in the FXML, and that's really nice. Here's our drop shadow, and on the right-hand side, we have the various text label, text fields, the 3 buttons that all have associated event handlers with them, and then the label down at the bottom. That gives a feedback to the user. So before we show you the controller, let's show you the REST service. And again, it's annotated with service. And here we see that we use the web client. So we give it a base URL, which is 8080 localhost. And we have methods for each of the REST calls. So the get music categories, which returns a list of music category, we use the web client get, and we give it a URI, we say retrieve, and then we have this thing called body to Flux. And as Paul said, Flux is the reactive publisher that returns 0 or more events. We collect it in a list, and then we block. And we block because in this case, we're doing synchronous calls. So that format is what we use in all the other ones, only the other ones we say body to mono, since it's a single music category that we're returning. And create then calls the web client.post, update calls web client.put, and delete calls web client.delete. And this is interesting because here we return a void, so it's body to mono void dot class. Okay, let's look at how are we doing in time?
Good.
Okay, great. Let's look at the view controller. Remember, this is the controller that talks to our view.fxml that I showed you. So we wire in our music REST service. And so let's go down to the initialize program first, initialize method first. Here are the binding expressions that control the disable property of all the buttons. And it depends on the state of the UI, but these binding expressions are if you can figure out a way to make them how you want them to be behaved, it's a much nicer way. Instead of writing bulky listeners, event handlers, you can do the binding expression. Okay, and we also have a selection listener that as you click different categories in the table, it displays category name in here, and the selection listener does that. And then to read the data, we call the music service.music categories, and we set the table view to populate the table. So now the only other thing to show you are the various event handlers for the create, update, and remove. And we call the music service methods that we went over earlier. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so Gail's going to shut down these projects, and also you want to take down the server because we're going to be running a different one here. So she's doing that right now. There we go. And go back to the notes, and here we are. Okay, great. All right, so we thought it would be good to show all of you how to do a fully reactive system. With both a client and a server. We just had a reactive client talking to our JPA database at that point. So to do that, we're going to use reactive streams. So what are reactive streams? Reactive streams is a core Java 8 library that implements a reactive programming model. This library provides asynchronous stream processing, meaning non-blocking, using a publish-subscribe model. The Flux and Mono wrappers that Gail had talked about and showed you a minute ago are implementations of the reactive streams publish interface. So subscribers receive a subscription and request data from the stream. Now remember, reactive is a push model, so events are pushed to all the subscribers as they come in. The default for the stream is unbounded, which means that a request is made for every data element that's available. The reactive service uses method intervals, which create a new Flux event for each specified time interval. And you can use maps to filter and transform your data as it goes out from the stream to the subscribers. There's also a concept of what's called a back pressure, which means that this happens if the data source is sending events faster than the subscribers can handle them. The library includes a stream operator that will drop these events for intervals in case of back pressure. And you'll see that in our code that's coming up. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Gail, and this is our third demo here, a fully reactive system now that is going to have both reacting on both sides, the client and the server, and we're going to redo our weather service with this model. So I'm going to let Gail show you that now.
Okay, I've just fired up the weather service, and the Ignite demo that we showed you, the first demo that we showed you, displayed random weather things, but it was just all done within the client program. And now this time we're going to have a weather service that emits a random weather forecast as server sent events in a 1.5 second interval. So we've fired up the server, and we can just go to the browser and check to make sure that it's running. So localhost. So it's the weather forecast is the URL we want, and you can see that emits JSON data, a forecast followed by a string that says what the forecast is, and then that just keeps running. So that our client will need to consume that. So let's look and see what the source code looks like for this. I'm not showing you the POM file. It uses the Spring Boot starter web flux that has the reactive web stuff. But I am going to show you the reactive weather repository. Okay, so so again, this is a class that implements weather repository, which yeah, I guess we're not showing that. Okay, so the find all. So since this is like a get. It returns flux.interval, and an interval is something that you can use if you want to emit something in an interval. And here we're doing it every 1500 milliseconds or every second and a half. We include on pressure drop, which, as Paul indicated, will drop an event if there's back pressure detected. The map then transforms the interval numbers into a generate forecast, which comes from here that calls the weather and gives you a random weather forecast. And then we convert that to flat map interval, which returns a flux of weather. And that is our publisher. Mm-hmm. So let's look at the controller then. So this is a REST controller, and it's a get mapping. And we wire in our weather repository. So this is the URL, weather forecast, that's what we typed into the browser to see this. And it produces a stream of server sent events, and it calls the weather repository find all. Okay, so it's time to fire up the client.
Get some weather forecasts.
Okay, so the structure of this program is the same as Ignite demo. We have two views, and the primary view makes calls to subscribes to our weather service and displays, as it gets weather events, displays them in a label down here. So you can see that it's the same type of forecast that is random. Now, when we click Get Current Forecast, what happens is it takes the latest forecast and then displays it. So,
oh, that's our forecast, hot and sunny. Actually, it's not hot, but it is sunny here. By the way, we tried to put some weather forecasts in there that would apply to a lot of you out there, because some of you are in the snow and some of you are in foggy and cold, but we're out here in California, so this happens to be where we're at this point. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so what I want to do is show you how you can use when Spring Boot does ejections. By default, it gives you a singleton. So we store the weather forecast in a singleton that we can then inject in both controllers, so in both views. So when we came to this view, we suspended the subscription, we stopped it, and now when we go back, we're going to start it again. So there's a little bit delay and it starts getting the subscriptions. Okay, so that's how it works. So let's look at our client a little bit. There it
weather
is.
client, there it is.
Okay, so the weather client uses the web client again, the same that we used in our database, but this time we can use it in asynchronous mode. So we give it the base URL and we say a get, and we do a retrieve now with the correct URI. And notice that it returns body to flux, so it transforms the response into a subscription.
And notice that we're not doing a block in this example like we did before, because these are asynchronous calls.
Okay, so the code that consumes this is the primary controller. And before we go down and look at that, note that here's the weather label that we display it with. And then here's the client. And then this is the my weather single. So as I said, it's by default singleton, and we can auto wire this in both controllers, so both controllers have access to the same object. Okay, so here's the subscription, and I know what you're thinking, that this is anonymous inner class, and we left it this way on purpose. You see, with your ID, you can transform it to a Lambda expression, which we would recommend doing it. But I thought it was interesting to keep it as an anonymous inner class, so you can see that here when we subscribe, we are accounting for two different kinds of consumers: a regular consumer that expects a weather event, and then an error consumer that expects a throwable. So in the weather event, you override the accept method, and then we display the answer in our label, and that's what you see as just put it up again as it comes out. This label, it's showing that. So this we encase the UI update in a platform.run later. And we do that because JavaFX is a single-threaded toolkit, as most toolkits are. And when you update the UI, you must be in the JavaFX application thread. So platform.run later executes what's in the block on the application thread. So it basically says the next time you can execute this code, execute it. We don't need the platform.run later down here because we're just logging the error. But if you were to display an error message to the user in a UI, then you would also put this in a platform.run later as well. Okay, so I just want to show the secondary controller real quick. So here we have the my weather, and again, that's how we by instantiating this singleton here, we can display the weather. Okay.
Okay. All right, how are we doing on time here? Oh, we're looking good. Yeah, we've got actually a couple of more demos that we're going to run for you. We won't have time to go through the code, but we'll tell you what they are and we'll run them, and then you can go to the GitHub and look at it later after our talk. So Gail's going to close everything down here.
Okay, taking down the weather service.
Yep, we're taking down the weather service. So here's what we'd like to do now is we use the H2 in-memory database to develop the code with JPA. And after we had that all done, we then migrated our program to a MySQL database. So Gail's going to actually fire up a MySQL server that is going to be doing everything you saw before, except it's going to be using a real database now. So she's going to fire that up here, and then then take it from there.
Okay, so I just fired up MySQL, Spring Boot REST MySQL, so it does the same, provides the same REST endpoints that you saw in the other one that uses the in-memory H2, but now we installed MySQL on the system, so it's talking to a MySQL database. There's a MySQL workbench that you can fire up that lets you look at the database similarly to the H2 console. So let's make sure everything's fired up and look at the tables, and look at our database. So there it is. Our database looks familiar. So we did that. So let's now run a client. Now we can run the exact same client that we showed you before. Absolutely no changes to the client. So we can talk to this server, this version of this server.
And a MySQL database.
Okay, so we're going to make a couple changes. Let's do Western. Take that. Let's get rid of blues. And let's add reggae. Okay, so let's look at the data. We have to refresh it. Okay, and now you see country western is there, blues is gone, reggae is added. Okay, so we are really talking to the MySQL database. Take this down.
Okay, and then let's do the multi-thread.
Okay, so this is done. Okay, so we have another client now. You may be thinking that, okay, the client that we just showed you made the database calls synchronously. So that means when they were making the calls that the UI was being blocked. So JavaFX has a concurrency library that lets you, if you don't want to block when you're making a background call like that, then you can use these, you can use tasks and do the database calls in a task. So we decided to implement a multi-threaded version of our client. Now we put in a delay just because we wanted to if you don't put in a delay, it just goes so fast and you can't really tell the difference, which is fine. But we wanted to show you, we used a JavaFX progress indicator. So let's just do a couple things. Now you notice that the database has changed. It's because it's persistent because we're talking to the MySQL now. So let's do a rock and roll. And update, and so we put a delay in, and that's the progress center. And while it's updating, though, because it's a background thread, we can still interact with the UI. So
yeah, so go back to country western and make it country again, and then update that. And while the spinner is going on, delete reggae.
Didn't do it.
Oh,
I wasn't
fast enough.
Whoops, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do it again.
Yeah.
I'm not fast enough.
Yeah, yeah, but anyway, you can play with this and you can vary the time on that as well. But it keeps the UI responsive while these background tasks are going. And when you look at the code, you'll see that we're using the concurrency library in JavaFX.
Well, since we have time, let's just show them the.
Yeah, real quick though. Okay. Yeah.
It's
because we want to be able to take questions here. But we're looking good here. Yeah, so you do want to take a look at this because this is more real world, probably.
Okay, so each of the create, update, delete has, we've created a task. And when we run the task, this is done in a background thread. And then these are the callback methods that we can actually, the callback methods are done on the application thread so we can safely update the UI. The tasks are down here. So we have so this is a create task that extends task, and the work is done here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We're done.
Okay, we're going to go back to the notes and summarize what we did here, and then we'll wrap it up and take some questions. So do you want to, you don't really need to take anything down,
no.
Probably. It's just, yeah. Okay, let's summarize what we did this morning, or for this morning for us anyway. Okay, so we showed you an all Java stack for development here. No front end that has any JavaScript or anything. And we also showed you Gluon Ignite, for having dependency injection between JavaFX and Spring Boot. And we showed you how you can separate your UI from all the backend operations. Using Spring Boot really simplifies working with JPA and REST, and we showed you that. And then we also showed you the Spring Web Client for non-reactive systems, as well as using reactive clients and servers. Okay. All right, let's wrap this up. We want to thank you all for attending. Here are the email addresses for myself and for Gail and our Twitter handles. We also have our latest book with JavaFX 17 here that you're welcome to look at if you want. We contributed too. And here is the source code for the GitHub on GitHub for all of the projects that you saw today. And so you're welcome to take a look at that, and we hope that'll be useful for you.
And Kirk's back.
And Kirk is back.
Yay!
So I'm going to move this closer so I could see it. Here we go.
Yeah.
And here we go.
Okay, so
ready? Okay.
Good.
So
Hi, Kirk. How are you doing?
There's been a few comments and things put on here. So first off, I think we're going to put up. I'll use Heinz as our exemplar in this case, and there's many more like this. So yeah, well done. Very interesting. I found it very interesting. It was really good, really fun, very insightful too. It's just amazing how much you can do, and it didn't look like there was a lot of effort involved in getting it. I'm sure there's more effort than it appears, but
yeah. Well, this is actually a lot of fun to write this code and to marry JavaFX with Spring Boot. It was pretty fun.
Right. So let's see. Hold on. This second, there was something about the popularity here. I was just trying to go through the comments and see. Here's a good question right here. That's it. I finally found it. Yeah.
Hi, Frank.
Yeah, Frank's in here too, right? Hey, Frank.
Yeah, I don't.
How often is JavaFX used for new projects? Popularity in 2022, and that's a difficult question to answer.
Well, it's. I mean, if you look at the download numbers, which I don't know what they are, but you can get it from JavaFX, Open JavaFX IO, as well as from Gluon. Gluon says that they just get tons and tons of downloads all the time, and for Scene Builder as well. So, it.
What happened?
Okay.
Sorry. You might have to add us again.
Oh, yeah, you'll have to add us again. Sorry.
Okay, add to stream. There we go. I don't know what happened here.
Yeah,
we do, but
yeah,
that's okay.
we closed something to get something a little bit. If you can add us again, that would be
no.
good.
You're in the channel. You're in the channel.
Okay.
But I don't see any videos, so that's fine for me.
Oh, our video's off. Okay,
Yeah.
So.
Well, we can just take the questions without.
Yeah.
There we go. We're back.
There you are. Ah,
okay.
Wow. Lovely. Sorry.
There we go.
User error.
Yeah. What's a talk without an error?
Yeah.
Okay. So, this talk isn't really about the wars between using Java or something else for the front end, but one of the main advantages of using JavaFX on the front end is that you are not subject to JavaFX libraries that change every 6 months or every 1.5 years. And JavaFX is very, very stable. So, and it's being enhanced all the time. And one thing that we didn't cover in this talk was that the other thing that we are interested in is writing mobile apps using JavaFX, and you can do that with JavaFX and the Gluon and Graal VM. and create native executables that run on both iOS and Android. And we have 2 apps in the stores that they were just kind of written to prove a point that you can do that. So they're both games and they're kind of fun. But it's a way to keep the source code for the Android version, and the Mac OS version, iOS version is exactly the same.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here, I can say that I've been teaching JavaFX for a number of years, and I teach that for private companies and also for government institutions. And most of those places have moved away from Swing and have moved to JavaFX, but you just don't hear about it because it's on the desktop. It's not, it's not on the browser, but it's on the desktop. And so most of these people have moved away from Swing and they've gone to JavaFX. But you can also get a good idea of the popularity of JavaFX by looking at the downloads that come out of Gluon as well, and with the other open source areas. But that's been my experience with that.
Also, Carl asked, is anyone using FXML with larger projects? And I didn't talk too much about FXML and why you would want to use FXML, but by separating the static view from the controller, it just helps organize your projects so that if you were to do the projects that we did totally in a controller kind of environment where you instantiate all of the controls, it's very, very bulky Java code. And so you're doing this, and then you're using getters to set, and it's just so much more streamlined in the FXML. Plus, that all of the static declarations of your view are in one place.
Right. And Gail, you really should advertise your games a little more on these talks, because they're fun.
They're addictive.
Okay, so somebody wants to know let's put up the
So what about a comparison of JavaFX versus Vaadin? Is the next question I had up here.
Of what? I don't even know.
Vaadin.
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna.
Yeah, somebody wants the.
Oh yeah. They want to have the link, the GitHub back up there.
Yeah.
So can you? Oh, here we are. Can you put us, Kurt? Can you put our screen in the?
Yeah. Can you add our screen to add screen to the?
Right.
How's
Okay.
that?
So sorry. Let's do the.
Now you want the code. There you go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So I can put that in the chat.
Yeah, we'll put that. We're going to put this in the chat.
Oh. Stop. Okay.
Well, you can just grab it there, and then you can put it in the chat.
Right.
I don't know. I can't put it in the chat. I don't know how to put it in the chat.
Yeah, just go to your YouTube thing and just put it in there, and it'll show up in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll let you do that and everything like that.
Okay, so you're gonna have to go.
Yeah, the GitHub repo is not readable. Can you put a repo link here? I think is what they were saying. And yeah, so that'll put it in the chat and everything like that. Yeah, and Jesper's been going on about how H2 actually is a real database. So.
Oh, okay. It certainly is a real database for the samples that we did too. So good. Okay, now go to the chat.
Yeah, there's. Yeah, I found it useful in certain instances also. So
I think it must be here.
Okay, so there's Heinz asked a question about updating the GUI in another thread.
Yes.
And that was sort of answered. Maybe you want to add to that?
Did not. Okay, we're trying to. Can you work on that? Yes. Okay, updating the GUI in another thread. You do not want to update the GUI in another thread. You want to update the GUI in the JavaFX platform thread. So there's several methods. There's a one that says platform.isApplication thread. And the one that I showed is platform.runLater, which you put code in a block, and that will make sure that code is executed on the JavaFX application thread. It's in there. So we put the link in the YouTube chat. Yeah. So it's in there. so you want to make sure you update the UI in the JavaFX application thread. So it's really so you just have to, if you're just doing a straight client, it's mostly, you don't have to worry about it. But if you are doing background thread, for example, asynchronous programming, you just need to make sure that when you get pinged with an asynchronous event, that if you're going to use that data to update the UI, you want to call platform.run later. And I think that I know Swing was that way as well.
Right.
And much of the stuff that we've done in our book, the NetBeans platform, it's using older versions of the NetBeans platform. So, but the concepts are the same. And that is, you can, for example, you can have a JavaFX window in a NetBeans platform. So that's having Swing and JavaFX work together. And you have to kind of know what threads you're doing things in. And it sounds like, oh my God, it's a nightmare, but it's pretty, I found it pretty straightforward to keep everything straight. But you just kind of have to understand the Swing thread and the JavaFX thread. But in this example, we're not worrying about Swing thread. We're just JavaFX and any other background thread.
Okay, yeah, so Heinz is saying he thought he saw you create a new thread and that was updating the GUI as well.
Yeah, I think that was in the multi-thread version. The last code that we showed.
Well, we okay, so so what we did was we created a new thread, but we used task, and task has a callback for onSucceeded. So when it calls the onSucceeded, it calls that in the JavaFX application thread. So we do all the updating in the callback. And that's what's nice about the JavaFX task library, is that we only showing part of it. So it has tasks onSucceeded, but it also has properties that you can manipulate that are safe to manipulate from JavaFX. That, for example, if you want to update a progress bar or something else, there's ways to do it safely.
Excellent.
So that's starting a new thread.
Yes. But Heinz is happy. Hi, Heinz.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if Heinz is happy, we can all go home.
If Heinz is happy, then everybody's happy, right?
Yeah, we all go home happy now.
It is 7 minutes past.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, I don't see any more new questions coming in.
Yeah, I did put the GitHub link in the YouTube chat.
That should show up
twice.
Here. I put it in twice, actually. So there you go.
I haven't seen it show up at all, actually, in the YouTube chat here as I'm monitoring.
Yeah, I see it right here. Okay, is it a rich?
Yeah, it should be. It should be there.
It should be there. Yeah, it's there. Is it a rich grid table component with the lazy load feature of large entity collections?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a good one. Can we
that's a good question. I think you can do it that way, but okay, they're saying not in this chat. Huh. Oh, I wonder if it's because you didn't register.
Oh.
No, it's I think you need to be subscribed or something, logged in to be able to comment.
Well, he's logged in, but
yeah, okay, so I see. Yeah, Bill's saying it's not in the chat.
Yeah, I don't see it showing up in the chat either.
Okay. Well, you can go. We're going to have.
Okay, so we'll put the link on our webpage.
Yeah, we'll put the link up on our website.
Sorry about that. I didn't think about.
Yeah, because we're going to put the slides up on our website later today, and so it'll be there as well.
Okay, let me just.
Is there any way that you can see grab it, Kirk? And
yeah, I'm doing it now.
Yeah, why don't you grab it and put it?
So if somebody just wants to know what it is, it's the github.com Gail ASG teach JavaFX dash Spring Boot dash samples.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
And apologize for that. So the question about the table, I think there's I think there's a way to lazy load it because table expects an observable list, and observable lists are things that respond to new data as it comes in.
Right.
So you just have to make sure that the listener that would respond to new data is executed on the JavaFX thread.
Gotcha.
Think about that.
Yeah, and somebody said it's probably better to use a service to create the task, and that's probably true.
Yeah, I think that probably is true.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah. So we, like I said, we're going to have the slide deck up on our website later today or tomorrow, so everybody can access that.
Yeah, spell check just nailed me, and I wasn't watching it, so I got it in there really in a stupid way. Lovely. I will fix it right now, but I think it's we're good to go. Okay, guys. So yeah, from all of us out here, and especially me, thanks for the wonderful presentation, and yeah.
Thanks for attending, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for attending.
Appreciate it, and thanks, Kirk, for anchoring us.
And hopefully, we'll all be able to get together personally and instead of virtually at some point. I got my fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah. So do I. I think time is coming. So that'll be really good to see everybody in person again.
Sure would.
Right. So that's a wrap. And
okay.
I hope you guys have enjoyed the conference so far, and continue to look at the next couple of talks that are coming up. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And podcast.